discuss the general economic context in India and development strategies, with a particular focus on agrarian crisis as something that this development model has responded to. So India faces challenges of poverty, unemployment, underemployment, and particularly precarious and unhealthy working and living conditions. And the proposed solutions to this problem, the ones that are being proposed at the moment, across most of the political spectrum, I include the Marxist left in this criticism, depend on high levels of economic growth, depend on urbanization, depend on an expanding middle class and a shrinking role of agriculture. That's orthodox development thinking at the moment. So this type of thinking also promotes individualism, consumerism, and competition among labour and consumers in society. And these policies, I will argue, have worsened the problems that India faces rather than improved them. So the political, economic, social and cultural environment is dominated by a discourse that either justifies neoliberal policy or says that, it might be bad and everything, but there's no alternative to it. And against this background, I'm going to say that the social experiment in Menda Village has provided one possible alternative to this general discourse that exists at the moment, right? So its wider significance is that it strongly challenges the dominant development discourse at the moment. Okay, so Menda is a small village in Maharashtra, and this social experiment that I'll talk about today has gone on since the early 1990s. The data that we got for this study has come from extensive interviews with the leaders of the village, and in addition to that, we've complemented that with interviews of other families in the village as well. So we've complemented that as well with site observations and visits to the village to observe development over time. So the paper in particular starts by talking about orthodox development strategies with a particular focus on Make in India, but we really argue that Make in India is just, we would say in Australia, old wine in a new bottle. It means that we're rebranding something without changing anything. Right, so there's been little change in India's development approach since liberalisation, despite the changes of names and that sort of thing. So current development strategies, whether they're adopted by the nationalist right or the Marxist left, are based on this false premise, which we discussed a little bit this morning in both Professor Patnaik and Professor Amin's lecture, that the European experience of capitalism is somehow a universal experience. That's how capitalism is. Everybody's going to follow that path, and we just have to follow the European path to get to the promised land of high levels of development. Now, if you paid attention this morning, you should know that that's not the case, and that there is not going to be another wave of settler colonialism in the world, and there's probably not going to be another wave of colonialism in general, or out-migration or any of those things. And therefore, we can consider the European experience as specific. And it's important that we learn the lessons of what that actually means for development in the future. So our paper argues that Menda Village provides a case study of alternative possibilities. What can development look like if it doesn't look like urbanization, if it doesn't look like shrinking agriculture, if it doesn't look like all those things I just spent the last 2 minutes running down. Right, so the Make in India development strategy, I've said, is not new. It's a rebranding of liberalization. It's a clever piece of political rhetoric, but that's about it. So the discussion of development strategy in this paper starts off as a critique of liberalization and globalization. So India as a labour surplus country, basically the critical factor we'll argue in this paper, why has India not developed as many people had hoped? It's because policies that have been adopted have not reduced the critical things. So we have not been able to reduce labour reserves, and that has created dynamics that are very unfavourable for labour in this country. And this is the result of colonial legacies, in particular, that destroyed pre-existing craft industries. So there's two major reasons for the ongoing problem. One is that India's post-independence development strategy did not affect the legacy effects of colonialism. Land reforms were shallow and superficial in most cases, and the basic ownership structures were left intact in terms of cultivation. This was compounded then by the Green Revolution, which increased the capital intensity of agriculture at the expense of agricultural labourers. And then capital-intensive industry strategy was also adopted, which basically generated minimal employment and a dependency on foreign imports. The major factor that underlies these problems is the tendency to take the European experience as general. So the trajectory of capitalist development in imperialist countries as if it's a generally acceptable law of development. Neoliberalism, but also orthodox Marxism, argues that capitalist expansion is going to destroy petty economies or absorb them into big capital and generate employment and industry as a result. Mechanizing and urbanizing our way to victory. A related presumption here is that capitalist development shifts the workforce from agriculture to industry. And inbuilt in this assumption is the argument that rural is equal to poor, agriculture is equal to poor, agriculture cannot be rich or developed, agriculture is associated with poverty. Right, so Prakash Karat, who was then the General Secretary of CPIM, once said that anybody who opposed West Bengal's appropriation of peasant land and its distribution to multinational corporations was an narodnik. Now, narodnik is a pejorative term that Lenin once used to talk about agrarian socialists in pre-revolutionary Russia. People who imagined that peasants could be socialists too, that they could have a commitment to socialism in some way that didn't involve going through a transitory capitalist phase. Now, this sort of discussion and debate is part of a wider trend in Marxism, which we call productive force determinism. We can also see productive force determinism exemplified by China's basic direction following the reform and opening theory. And we can see this theoretically in the discussion of what we call a primary phase of socialism. The argument that we need a long period of capitalist or market-driven development, urbanization and industrialization if we're ever to make it to socialism. But socialism depends on all of those things. So the two main factors that we learned this morning that make European experience unique and impossible to replicate in other countries is that firstly, European labour reserves were depleted by settler colonial regimes. I suppose I'm the product of one such settler colonial regime, being from Australia. This reduced the labour supply in the home countries, basically by acquiring large amounts of land through displacement and genocide of indigenous people. That turned a large group of people who would otherwise be a massive labour reserve into property, petty bourgeois people, right? People who owned land or had access to means of production from the beginning of their experience in these settler colonial regimes. On top of that, we had colonialism, which delivered a monopoly of markets and national resources, which continued beyond decolonization, right, through regimes of trade and finance. Now, there is no way that these experiences are going to be replicated by any developing country today. There is no way you're going to be the next settler colonial regime. There is no way you're going to achieve a monopoly of markets and natural resources. That is just a fact. So this assumption that it's possible to catch up with the West via capitalist development is therefore a fundamentally flawed assumption. And it's important that we learn the lessons of this conclusion. What does that mean for what is development going to look like in the world today, if this is true? So rather than resolve the current problems, India's development strategy compounds them. Any development strategy, I will argue, needs to be based and designed on a country's internal dynamics, right? And the current development strategy proposed by neoliberalism is one of attracting foreign direct investment and promoting export-led development. And this really ignores India's internal conditions at the expense of the external conditions of the world of its trade and finance. So after a long experience of liberalisation, I believe the trends are clear in terms of what liberalisation has meant for working people in this country. It's meant a dependency on imports, low value-added manufacturing, rising capital intensity in what is a labour surplus economy, and this has all contributed to what we call jobless growth and a declining labour share of GDP. All right, 5 minutes, this is going to be fun. Right, so let's just talk about agriculture for a little bit. I'm going to say that agriculture in India is subject to a severe crisis based on the failure to address land reform question after independence. Actually, it's the case that from the 1970s until now, we've seen the size of land holdings grow smaller and smaller, and this has aggravated a pre-existing crisis. I'm going to move forward to talk about Menda village, right? So, Menda village is in Maharashtra, has about 105 families, about 300 voters, and an important political event happened in the village in the 1970s, which was basically two giant dams were proposed, which would have wiped the village off the face of the earth, and suddenly a wave of political activism emerged in response to this, right? The villagers were successful in preventing the dams, right? And this meant a lesson to them was that, okay, if we work collectively, if we behave politically collectively, we can actually get some of the things we want. We can at least challenge this attempt to, completely destroy us. So we can use our collective strength to protect our forests and our livelihoods and our way of life. So after this, the villagers didn't say, well, we stopped the dams, let's just celebrate and party. No, they formed Patiala, so study circles, where villagers discussed and conceptualized their problems and thought, okay, we used our collective power to win that time, what else can we use our collective power to do? And they made the following decisions. So that they were going to try and be as independent as possible from the government, in terms of their economic scenario. And we'll see why this is important in a minute. Number two, they were going to prevent outsiders, whether from the government or not, doing anything in the forest. So they were asserting sovereignty over the forest as their economic resource, without the permission of Gram Sabha. Again, number three, there would be no commercial exploitation of the forest. The forest is considered a natural right, and not a commodity, not a thing. Number four, villagers would protect the forest by regularly patrolling it, and they would develop a mechanism to actually keep this resource in their hands. They'd regulate the resources that could be extracted, so they would maintain a sustainable development model. Number six, water and soil conservation would be taken to avoid soil erosion. Forests would not be set on fire, and villagers would work collectively to firefight. Encroachment would be not allowed, and the last and most important, I think, is that a committee would be formed with 2 members of each household to implement all of these decisions. So these are not a set of decisions that just get made and then you're forgotten about. There is an accountability mechanism at play that says everybody is going to own these decisions and make them happen. So these decisions had 2 basic dimensions. Number one, the tribal peoples of Mandalika asserted sovereignty over the forest. They asserted their rights over the forest. And number two, they institutionalized a form of power in the form of Abhyasgats and Gram Sabha as a way of making decisions as the supreme governing authority at the village level. So during this time, the Gram Sabha also revived a traditional system of education called the Fulu, which was the tribal people's traditional education system. This led to a future conflict with the forest department, at least explicitly on the grounds that, okay, you're using teak wood to construct the buildings, that's technically state property, so we're going to fight you for it. We can talk about the underlying cause being different. Now what that did is it generated a mass movement where there was a decision made by all of the villagers in the region to disobey the forest department's orders and to construct kulturs in all of the villages. So it explicitly resist the decision of the state. And the forest department soon discovered that it lacked the capacity to respond to all of those people disobeying its orders at the same time. And this was the next important step in asserting rights over the land. So, Menda Gram Sabha meetings and Abhyasgats had a great focus in learning the importance of collective property. And I think this is a really important thing, particularly in the context of, I suppose, the last 20 years, the declining legitimacy of collective systems of ownership and production. In China, we had a forceful state-led decollectivization effort, starting with the dismantling of people's communes in the late 1970s and early 1980s. And this kind of meant intellectually to the rest of the world, this idea of collective working and living sort of took a bit of a hit. Nobody wanted to be associated with doing that sort of thing. And neoliberalism as a general context promotes individualism. So we don't exactly live in a current climate that says, okay, doing things collectively is a great idea. I really think that examples like Menda Village are part of a broader story where economic development and collectivism go hand in hand and are possible together, right? I've done separate field work in Punjabi village in Chhattisgarh, which is another example of collective farming, and there's examples in China that are now being documented of a re-collectivization of agriculture. So I think that at least there are some examples of people moving in the other direction towards collectivization. So what's interesting about the Menda example, and I'll finish after this, is that they decided by consensus, voluntarily, to collectivize all of their property. So everything that they own, all of the means of production owned by every villager in this village. Every cattle, every bullock, every farm implement, every tractor would become the collective property of the village government. Water supply and infrastructure became collectivized. The family system became collectivized. You know, there was a decision in the village that children would not be the property of their parents anymore, that they would be the property of the whole village, creating the moral implication that the village as a whole is responsible for every child's development, you know, not the individual family. So collective herd rearing was established as a practice, and most importantly, the village people donated all of their land titles, right? This finalized the collectivization of property in this village in a permanent way. You know, there would have to be a serious intervention to overturn this. So, in addition to this, the village asserted a democratic framework to manage this collectivized process. So, in Menda Gram Sabha, all decisions are made by consensus. You can't just impose your will on a minority. The village philosophy also says we definitely don't want a permanent class of leaders, right? We definitely don't want a leadership class emerging, you know, a bureaucratization of this village. They basically implemented a limited tenure system that says every 3 years the leaders are going to change, even if they were good, right? We're going to get new leaders because we don't want a bureaucratization of this process. So, I think that Menda Gram Sabha has provided an example of success. It's not the only model, it's not the golden bullet or the silver bullet to success, but there are significant reasons to believe that this is something to think about, right? When most of the country is experiencing agrarian crisis, massive migration from rural areas to cities as a result of distress, as a result of unsustainable livelihoods, this is a village where they have eliminated distress migration, where they've attained a sustainable footing in agriculture and the use of the natural resources that they have. They've only been able to do that by asserting sovereignty over those same natural resources, but also using that sovereignty in a collective way, you know, establishing economies of scale and establishing control over the economic resources that they have, right? This has led to significant improvements in the income levels of villages, in the levels of education, in food security, and in further development projects that are being established as we speak. Right, so in conclusion, India is a country with a massive, historically created labour surplus that typically overcrowds the agricultural sector. I've argued that the current development strategies being adopted in most of the country makes this problem worse. It does not resolve the crisis. This crisis can only be resolved through thoroughgoing land reforms, and I've argued that Menda's example is an example of land reform in a way. You know, if you collectivise all the land, it's kind of a big land reform. So by building a new collectivity with these democratic dynamics, I've argued that Menda village has been able to channel the energy of all of the villages towards the socio-economic transition of village life, despite the overall context that is hostile, right? Despite an overall neoliberal context that says doing all of the things that you're doing is bad and wrong and going to lead to a tragedy and disaster, right? So, as a large part of rural India and much of the world is facing a similar situation, an agricultural crisis, the success story of Menda offers an effective strategy to try and help them transform reality and move out of precarity and conflict.